Otis Redding, the legendary soul singer, died in a plane crash on December 10, 1967. His death has been the subject of various conspiracy theories, but was the crash actually sabotage? And if so, who would orchestrate something like that and why? Were there obvious business rivalries at play? Was somebody going to benefit substantially from insurance payouts if he took Otis Redding out? And of course, there's also the possibility that it was simply a pilot error or mechanical failure. But since Otis Redding died on December 10th, 1967, the world has speculated to no end. In today's episode of Roots Music History, we are deep diving into who Otis Redding was and the details of that fateful crash. Otis Redding was born on September 9th, 1941, in Dawson, Georgia. He was the fourth of 6 children in his family. His parents were Otis Redding Sr. and Fannie Mae Redding. His father worked at Robins Air Force Base and occasionally preached in local churches, which had a significant influence on Otis's early exposure to music. From a young age, Otis showed a strong interest in music. He started singing in the Vineville Baptist Church Choir, and that's where it became pretty clear to everyone that he was a born performer. Although Otis was born into a faithful family, the Reddings didn't have it easy by any means. They faced years of financial difficulties, which really shaped Otis's determination and work ethic later in his life. As soon as Otis was old enough to do so, he started taking on various jobs to help out his family, none of which were very glamorous, by the way. As a young boy, he was a well digger for a while. He also worked as a gas station attendant and a delivery boy.
I used to be a well driller.
For water wells type thing?
Yeah.
Not oil?
No, not all. I didn't have that much experience. I did water wells, you know.
When he wasn't going to school or working, music was his escape. He was heavily influenced by gospel music and rhythm and blues. And at the age of 10, he learned to play the guitar. He started to participate in local talent shows. Later, he attended the Ballard Hudson High School, where he continued to perform and practice guitar. By the time he was a teenager, he joined a local band called the Mighty Panthers. The Mighty Panthers played all around town, and it was in this time when Otis was a teenager, he met his future wife Zelma and future manager Phil Walden. All 3 of them remained really close for the entirety of his life. While engulfing himself in the music scene, Otis befriended a guitarist named Johnny Jenkins. Johnny didn't have a driver's license, and Otis did, and Otis was quick to offer up his driving services to Johnny in exchange for the opportunity to play with him around town. One day in 1962, Otis had driven Johnny to a recording session at Stax Records in Memphis, Tennessee. After Johnny finished his session, Otis came in to hang out with him and the studio owners allowed Otis to record a couple of his own songs, just kind of for fun. They had extra time to kill. And while it was very impromptu, Otis recorded the song These Arms of Mine, which was a very soulful ballad that really showcased his powerful voice. Jim Stewart was the co-founder of Stax Records and was beyond impressed by Otis and this recording. Pretty much right then and there, he offered Otis a record deal.
How did you get to be a singer from being a well driller?
Well, I was taking a friend of mine to Memphis, Tennessee to record a record. His name was Johnny Jenkins. And I took him up there. They paid me to take him. I think they paid me about $10 to take him up there.
Just hired you as a driver?
Yeah, just to drive him up there. And so when I got there, after he finished his session, I asked him to let me do a song called These Arms of Mine. And the record came out, and it was a pretty big record.
So the driver got the hit out of the session?
Right, that was it.
And Otis's song, These Arms of Mine, was officially released in 1962. It immediately became a hit and hit number 20 on the R&B charts. And more than Otis being an immediate success on the charts, he was also just a very likable guy. He started building close relationships with Booker T and Isaac Hayes, which led to some really great collaborations and networking opportunities.
He is the only singer that I ever had to open their mouth and say something that made the hair on my arm stand up. When he did These Arms of Mine, hold it. Jim knew and I knew that was a single.
Yeah.
It was a good song. He did die young, 26 years old when he passed away. But think about how much stuff we recorded between 63 and 66. He was 26 years old.
Yeah.
He used the following year of 1963 to really develop his songwriting and recording skills and build himself a catalog of songs. In 1964, he released his full debut album, Pain in My Heart. The album included the hit song, These Arms of Mine, and also a new hit song, That's What My Heart Needs. Later in 1964, he released his second album called The Great Otis Redding Sings Soul Ballads. He also toured and performed live every chance he could. By the end of 1964, Redding had established himself as one of the prominent figures in soul music. His influence also began to extend beyond the R&B charts, and he started attracting attention from mainstream audiences as well, and other musicians. Otis really went through the roof in 1965, though. He released another hit song in April of 1965 called I've Been Loving You Too Long, which hit number 2 on the R&B charts and number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100. That song was featured on his September 1965 album, Otis Blue. One of those songs is Respect, which he actually wrote. Aretha Franklin brought it to gold, but Otis Redding wrote the song Respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, that one, and a couple of other cover songs by Sam Cooke and the Rolling Stones. And it was really these covers that marked the beginning of Redding crossing over into the mainstream music market from just solely R&B and soul, solely soul, no pun intended. Otis just really had this incredible ability to appeal to both R&B and pop audiences. And this made him an absolute favorite and facilitated his touring to now extend internationally into Europe. In 1965, Otis also purchased a huge 440-acre ranch. It was located in Round Oak, Georgia. He named it the Big O Ranch and built a beautiful home on it, and it featured not just this large, beautiful main house, but several other buildings as well, and plenty of land where he could care for and ride horses. In 1966 was huge for him. He released 2 more albums and toured everywhere. Otis Redding was officially on top of the world in 1966, and no one could have ever imagined he had less than a year to live. His net worth at this time was approximately $10 million, and Phil Walden, who he had met back in the 1950s when he was a teenager, had a front row seat to all of Otis Redding's success. It was also in 1967, Otis played San Francisco's Fillmore West Theater. And then, after that, he spent a full week on a houseboat that was docked in Sausalito. And it was on this houseboat that he wrote a song he and Phil were convinced would break him through even further into mainstream media, into the white audiences, and ultimately catapult him to superstardom. He called it Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay. On December 7th, just 3 days before his death, Otis recorded the song in the studio. He then left on a tour with his backup group, the Briefcase, and they were set to play in Madison, Wisconsin, thanks to a Madison promoter named Ken, who had booked them to play in his club called The Factory. The Madison gig was set to be on December 10th, and the band would be coming to Madison from Cleveland, where they had played 3 shows the night before. Otis Redding, 6 of his band members, and pilot Richard Fraser were the souls on board that flight. They boarded a twin-engine Beechcraft Bonanza just after 12 p.m. on the 10th. Just before 3:30 p.m., though, the plane suddenly crashed into Lake Monona, killing everyone on board except a man named Ben Cawley.
I lost that seat belt. That seat belt I had in my hand in the water. Another one floated up to me.
It floated away?
Yes, but another one came up to me.
Oh, another one came up to you?
Yeah, and I had in my hand. And I just held onto it. I said,
And then after about 20 minutes, they came and they pulled you out.
Right, exactly. 25 minutes they came.
About 25 minutes. But they couldn't save anybody else.
Right. And I was the only one who couldn't swim.
And the only one that couldn't swim.
Hello.
Following the crash, over 4,500 people attended Otis Redding's funeral. Dock of the Bay was then released in January of 1968 and immediately skyrocketed to #1 on the charts. Not only did the fact that Ben Cauley survived this plane crash shock fans everywhere, but people were even more shocked and actually angry when they found out that there was a briefcase on board that flight that allegedly contained thousands of dollars. And that briefcase was never found or recovered from the site. That fact alone led everyone to begin believing there could have been foul play here. But the rumors really spun out of control when journalist Scott Freeman published a biography called Otis. And in this biography, he made it seem as though Walden, his manager Phil Walden, perhaps could have been positioned to get $1 million in insurance money from Otis Redding if he died, and insinuated that Phil Walden had ties to the mob, almost like exactly trying to paint the picture of what went down with Jimi Hendrix and his manager. Now, many people refute this claim because Otis Redding was worth much more to Phil Walden alive than he was dead. And this was not like a Jimi Hendrix situation at all. Phil Walden could have easily made $50 million to $100 million from Otis Redding's future success. He really had no motive to get rid of him whatsoever, especially with the song Dock of the Bay finished and ready for release just 3 days before his death. I think he did the final touches of that song the day before he died. And in Scott Freeman, the journalist's defense, he didn't put that much weight into the conspiracy surrounding Phil Walden, but nonetheless, he still spoke about that and insinuated that, which resulted in Phil Walden and Zelma, Otis's widow, suing Scott a year after that got published for $15 million. And this was a really hard and emotional time for Phil Walden. This biography by Scott was published in, I think, 2001, could have been 2002, and it was 2002, 2003 when this lawsuit ensued. You know, for Phil Walden, Otis Redding was not just an artist he managed, he was also a longtime friend, spanning decades. And some people felt for Phil and felt for these rumors that were going upon him, and they tried to kind of shift the blame, possibly from Phil Walden, to a man named James Brown, who sold Otis Redding a faulty plane to begin with. Now, according to an autobiography that James wrote, he admits that he sold Otis Redding a faulty plane, but he also says that when he sold Otis Redding that twin-engine Beechcraft, he warned him over and over against flying it until it had been properly restored, or if it ever was properly restored. But not everyone believes James, and many people believe James Brown sold Otis Redding that faulty aircraft on purpose, like maybe someone put him up to it. Now, while James was an easy target to blame, the controversial theory surrounding Phil Walden was much more involved and complex, but always seemed to lack any sort of validity at all. Whereas when you look at Mike Jeffrey, things kind of line up with Mike Jeffrey. He was a very suspicious guy. And I talk more about Mike Jeffrey in detail in my Mike Jeffrey episode, which of course, if you have not seen that, I will link it in the description down below. But Phil Walden really didn't seem to be like that. He was not on a Mike Jeffrey level. So the conspiracies surrounding Phil Walden, they all just kind of fell to the wayside. And Zelma, Otis Redding's widow, is very adamant that Phil Walden would have never done anything like that at all. In fact, Zelma and Phil remained very close friends following Otis's death, and even when Phil Walden passed away in 2006, Zelma had nothing but good things to say about him. So where did the briefcase with all of that money go? Well, where did the left wing and the engine of the plane go? Those were never found either. I'm curious to know what you think, though, so let me know in the comments down below whether or not you believe Phil Walden could have had anything to do with the Otis Redding plane crash. Did he conspire with James Brown to give them a faulty plane? Did he really have anything to gain by doing any of that at all? If you like this type of content, also don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button. You have no idea how much it helps to have one extra subscriber and one extra thumbs up. You can also give me a super thanks, which is a button at the bottom of the play bar that allows you to donate any amount of money that you would like to the channel. And I always say you can help directly with the research of these episodes by buying me a coffee. That helps me directly because, hey, you're caffeinating me. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all on the next Roots Rockumentary.
Hungry for the road all my life, thirsty for adventure all my youth, chasing all my freedoms down Liberty Avenue.